Okay, so apparently we're doing Petticoat through Facebook and on my phone. So I'm gonna hopefully see people join me here. I don't know what happened on YouTube, honestly. I'm actually, it said it went through just fine and then it stopped. And I don't know what rules I broke at all. So I'm going to hopefully figure it out. So okay, so if you see me on Facebook, hit hello, please, because I can't see it. I can't see if it's working. I'm assuming it is. So hopefully, let's see. Yeah, I don't know how to tell if it's working or not. So it's 2:04. I'm gonna go ahead and start, and we'll just go from there. Hopefully this setup is gonna work. I had it better on my computer, I think. So my phone doesn't really want to stand up, so that's kind of the hiccup. Oh, I think I have one person watching. Is there a way for you to hit like a heart or a like to make sure that you're actually watching? Hopefully Dee Dee will be joining us. Oh, there's words. Oh, hi, Kit. Yay. You are so wonderful. Thank you for being patient with me. I appreciate it. Okay, we're a couple minutes after 2, so I'm going to go ahead and get started, mostly because the faster I get started, the faster I make the petticoat, the faster I can get it on the editing software and up on Patreon and my YouTube channel and everywhere else that I thought that I would be able to live stream. So hopefully people will start joining and asking questions, and we'll move on from there. Okay. So I wanted to start with, a lot of people have probably seen this pattern. It is a Petticoat Simplicity pattern 5006. And I have actually made 3 different petticoats from this pattern. This is a modern pattern, but of course, like everything else that I do, I modify stuff. So this is the long petticoat that I made, and this one is pretty much this one right here, except I added a flounce to it. Now, apparently in my inner eye, I think I'm taller than I am. So I made it really long, okay? And if you look closely, I had to add a pleat here to pull it up to make it shorter. And then I also added a huge pleat at the waistline to also make it shorter. So I ended up making it quite a bit shorter because I didn't calculate the flounce length very well. I also made it a tie-on petticoat with, and this one requires zippers. And I don't do zippers on my history bounding clothing or on my historical SCA clothing. So this is a petticoat that follows that pattern. But what I wanted to show you today is actually one that I like better. It is kind of this one. See that yoke at the top? I really like the yoke because it cuts down on bulk around the waist. And I don't wear a corset day to day. I have one but I don't wear one. So I really enjoy that this one lays flat at the waist, so that if you're wearing a bodice, like a 15th, 16th century bodice, it lays flat and you can't really tell that you're wearing a petticoat extra skirt. So the pattern pieces I'm using on this one is I'm using the 15 yoke, which is technically the back. It's the yoke back. And I am going to use panel 16 for the pattern. Now, I say that I have traced yoke. You need 4 for the front and 4 for the back. And this says to cut on the center back. You can cut 2 on the fold, and that'll give you your front and your back. And then you can cut 4 separate pieces if you want to, or you can cut 2 more on the fold and cut them in half. And I'll explain that in a minute. So the pattern pieces right out of the pattern look like this. Okay, now I made my pattern piece a little bit bigger because I am not going to use a zipper, and it's not gonna be really, really fitted. It's actually somewhat loose. So I cut it just a little smidge bigger, but not by a lot, okay? And the 16 pattern piece, on this it says to cut 3 on the fold, okay? So 3 on the fold is, according to my measuring here, 20 inches long. So 20 inches around the waist, and you have to cut 3. So that's going to equal 2, 4, 6, 60 inches. Now, I'm gonna show you a couple of adaptations to this pattern because I take patterns and I adapt from them. This is not okay, I'm gonna follow this pattern exactly. You can go out and buy this pattern and follow it exactly if you want to. That's not how I sew. And I wanted to show you kind of my thought process on this petticoat. Okay, so I have all my pattern pieces. I also kind of wanted to show off that I put my pattern pieces in manila envelopes and I iron them flat so that they all fit back in. And then I'm not fighting pattern pieces all of the time. And then I have a bin that I put them in. Okay, so the original pattern piece said cut 3, they're all individual pieces, and that equals 60 inches long. So I know that I need a piece of fabric that is at least 60 inches long, if not more, depending on how much fullness I want on the bottom part of the petticoat underneath the yoke. But I know that I want the yoke to come at least to here because I'm going to want to put a placket in it so that it's easy to get on and off over my hips. I have girly hips, you know, like most of us who've had children. We have girly hips. Okay, so this is actually the petticoat I made probably about 2 years ago now from that pattern. So you can see the yoke in the back is one solid piece. It's cut on the fold, and it's 2 sides, and then I have 2 front yoke pieces. Now on this one, I know that I used the actual front yoke piece on the original pattern, and it is smaller, and I didn't want that. This barely fits, okay? It does have a drawstring at the top, which I'm going to mimic today, but this skirt is the 3 pieces cut on a fold. And I figured that I can, well, no, sorry. This is 1, 2, so 1 piece is cut on the fold and then 2 pieces are not on the fold. So it is exactly the 60 inches. And so I am going to use a different method today. So this is a king size sheet. And I have, no, sorry, queen size sheet. So I have cut a piece of fabric the length of the petticoat skirting that I want it to be. I've hemmed it, and this is one long queen size sheet. So if you measure it, this is 1 yard, 2 yards, 3 yards, and 10 inches. So that's quite a bit longer than 60 inches. But I wanted the fullness because this petticoat is almost not quite full enough for some of my skirting. So I have cut the length because I'm short and I also have the yoke to take into consideration. I have cut this length 32 and then hemmed it 1/4 inch, okay? Okay, so instead of using the rectangular pattern pieces, I've just taken advantage of using 100% cotton sheet. It's got a really nice like stripy consistency to it. Can you see that? So it has a stripe, a subtle stripe to it, but it's 100% cotton. I did a burn test, so there's no polyester fabric in here. So it'll breathe really nicely. Cotton is very comfortable to wear up against the skin, and I really enjoy it. So that's the skirting piece. Now I have already cut out the yoke. So the yoke pieces you can get out of scrap sheeting just like I did. So this is the exact same fabric as that, and I cut out 2 yokes on the fold and I pin them together because I'm going to sew along the top of this, okay? And then 2 that are not on the fold on one side and 2 that are not on the fold on the other, and I have sewed them together to create one long piece, okay? And then I've pinned them together, right sides together. Can you see that? And this is the waist yoke. So, and if you notice, I'm pulling this way up above my jeans line because my waist is actually way up here. So if you bend, you want to look at your waist. You don't want to look at where it's going to hit down on your hips because then the yoke's not going to fit. And if you see, it overlaps quite a bit. So I used just the size 15 pattern for both the front yoke and the back yoke. The original pattern has 2 separate pieces, the front yoke being smaller than the back yoke. And I definitely wanted to make sure I had enough fabric because on the original first petticoat I made, you can see that I created a placket here. I used some silk to bind that because once it goes on, it's actually almost exactly the right size. I don't really have to tighten this much. And I wanted a little bit more of an overlap this time on this petticoat. Okay, so I'm gonna go sew this top together and then we'll go to the next step. So I hope everybody's enjoying their quarantine. It's one heck of a isolation. I'm coming to you actually from my work. I have been in quarantine at my office for 13 days now. This is day 13 or 14, 13? I don't know, I lose track. So I'm using a 1/4 inch seam. So I'm using the presser foot as the edge matched up to the edge of the fabric. Now I know that I'm going to put a drawstring in this, so I want to be very careful that I utilize my fabric efficiently. I don't want to have to add a whole nother piece on top of the yoke to create the drawstring channel. I know that there's a way you can do that, but I don't want to do that. So ultimately, if you do this in kind of a save your fabric stash and use old sheets, old cotton sheets, you can really save on a lot of fabric doing it this way. This is actually probably one of my favorite things, is to repurpose old linens that might have a hole in it somewhere, or, I mean, you never know if I'm going to be wearing a striped whatever. My great bright green striped petticoat's an example. Oh, people are talking. Hey, Adele. Welcome. Okay. So, I have sewn my 2 yoke plackets together. So you can see they're sewn together. Okay, so I haven't ever done this live, so I apologize if the angle's all goofy. Okay, so here's the placket. So this is my front, this is my back, and this is my other front, so it wraps around the waist. I have sewn them together. So now what I need to do is I need to clip the curve, and then I need to iron it together, okay? So I wonder if there's a way I can show you how I clip the curve without making everybody nauseous by moving the camera around. Oh, there we go, that works. Okay. So, there we go. So if you, it's kind of, I guess, I don't know if you can see it or not, but this curve is pretty tight, and this curve in the middle back is pretty tight. So I want to make sure, and I'm clipping, I'd say, about every inch through the most severe part of that curve. And I'm coming to the back waist, and I'm going to clip How are you lovely ladies doing in isolation? Hopefully everybody's staying safe. Sorry. Okay. So front yoke. So I'm just clipping the most tight part there of the yoke. Now I'm going to fold it up. And I don't have a tailor's ham or any of the fancy ironing things that all these lovely tailors have. I am kind of a minimalist, I guess. I have lots of things like fabric and threads, lots of embroidery material, but not so many of the other tailoring tools. It's on my bucket list. Okay, so because I don't have a tailor's ham, I'm being really careful to make sure that the seam is flat going that way so that I can see and make sure that that seam is flat on this side before I fold it over, and I'll show you here. If you don't have a tailor's ham, this is actually a really good way of making sure that everything is flat inside that seam. Day 20 with only 3 essential runs. Good job, girl. Hopefully you're wearing a mask and gloves when you go out. Okay, so I've sewn the seam flat, and now I'm gonna fold it, okay, so that you can see that nice crisp seam. And because I've clipped the seam, it's actually very nicely folding over without much argument. Let's see if I can show you. So it's actually folding over really nicely. It's not giving me a whole lot of fuss. So it's a combination of both clipping the seam and ironing it flat from with the other piece of fabric away from it. I wish there was a way for me to show you here. So let's see if my camera will show. I don't know if you can see, but you can see where those pieces that I clipped are open inside the seam. Hey Gina, happy to have you. Okay, so those of you that just joined, we are, I was just talking about how to iron a seam flat if you don't have a tailor's ham. So I ironed the whole thing I clipped the seams and then I ironed from one side, held it open and ironed from the other side. So that's what we're doing now. Hopefully that's clear. It really kind of wants to lay flat if you've clipped your seams, and if you don't have a tailor's ham, this is a really nice way of doing that. So you can really see that seam, those clipped seams through your cotton. I mean, if you're using white cotton, I guess it would be a little bit more difficult if you're using a patterned cotton. But any old sheet will do, any old cotton. I mean, I would highly recommend a cotton sheet for this project, not polyester, but you use what you have, right? Okay, so I now have a yoke that has been sewn together. So I've got two pieces here, okay? I have sewn each front panel to the back panel as one continuous, and then I sewed both of them together, right sides together, folded them over, or clipped seams, ironed, folded it over, ironed. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to create my drawstring drawstring, help me out, what's the word I'm looking for? Channel, drawstring channel, there we go. Okay. So those of you that follow Morgan Donner probably have seen one of these things. It's called a measuring gauge. Now, prior to me having one of these things, oh, hey, Dee Dee, you're beautiful too. So prior to having one of these things, I would use this tool, okay? Now, as you can see on mine, it no longer has the little red slidey bit because that's probably the first thing that I broke on it. This is okay, but I love this. Now, the reason I love this is that, I'm gonna move the camera, hopefully you can see. So, when you're using this gauge to measure, so I'm gonna try to measure a drawstring channel here. I want to pick the measurement that I'm going to use. Now, I like a 1 inch. If you look at this gauge, it's really easy to line this up and slide it along your edge, where this is not as easy. You can very easily make a mistake, okay? Yeah, Kit, these are amazing. I love them. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do next. I am going to measure along here, and I'm going to use my chalk as soon as I find out what I did with it. Chalk, chalk, chalk. Where did you go, chalk? There's the white chalk. Where's the blue chalk? Oh, there it is, right in front of me. Okay, so I'm going to mark. I can only do it a little bit when I have the phone the way it is. But I'm going to go along and I'm going to mark this on that 1 inch to give myself a really nice drawstring channel. Okay. There we go. So a 1 inch channel probably seems a little big, but I'm going to actually show you what I do when I get over to the sewing machine. The other thing that's really nice is one of these. I got these for Christmas from Luke, I think. I brought the one that I use the most. This is a curve, and it doesn't have a really tight curve to it, but it's just enough of a curve that once I get my line started, I can use it to create a straight line. And I'll show you when I get done with this so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so Kit, you've got one. These are amazing, right? I can't imagine not having one now. Isn't it amazing, like, the tools that we find for one another? And then we share it. We're like, oh, you have to get this tool. That's the one beautiful thing I love about the costuming community is that for the most part, nobody's really stingy with their tools, right? Like, oh, I found this. Here, you should get one. Okay. Dee Dee, you joined a few minutes later. You still here? Did you have any questions? Because I know you had petticoat questions, right? And if anybody has questions, just holler. I started right at 1, so I may have gone through stuff before you were able to start, and I'm happy to go over stuff. Okay. So I've marked my blue line. I'm going to go back with my ruler. It's not the perfect circle, but it is the one that I brought with me. I got a whole kit of these for Christmas. I think Luke got them for like 12 bucks on Amazon for a whole bunch of different shapes. They're a flimsy plastic. They're not fancy. Sophia, did you have questions on the pattern I'm using? Does anybody have a question about the pattern I'm using? I know I kind of went over that already, but I can do it again. It's entirely up to you. So one of the reasons I love using these curves is that I have done it using a straight ruler. You can totally use it using a straight ruler, but it's almost an exercise in extreme frustration. So I do recommend a curve if you can get a hold of one. Okay, so I have drawn my line, and now I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna pin just every once in a while on this curve, because I want the two pieces of fabric to kind of be married together for when I go back and sew this channel in. I don't really want it to slip and move. I am gonna do 2 rows of stitching next. I'm gonna do a top stitch along that seam line to hold the channel down on the top, and then I'm gonna do the sewing across the blue line so that I make sure that my bottom channel is in. Okay, Dee Dee is watching, okay. It looks like Facebook says people are watching and people have stopped watching and people are watching and stopped watching, so I think there's something weird going on with the feed. So hopefully everybody's having a good time. Okay, we're gonna go over the sewing machine. Wah, 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 the magic of transference. Okay, now we're gonna try to do this so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I wish I had a good stand for my phone. This would make it a little bit easier. Trying to do this one-handed is tricky. Okay, so we're gonna start with I want to do a tiny line right here, and then I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna do a stitch line here. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm gonna put this back where you can see me from a distance. It's a little hard to do this any other way, sorry. Don't forget to back stitch a little bit. Something also to make sure of is that you have a fresh needle for every project. I can't tell you how important that is. It makes a big difference in stitch quality. It makes a difference in how your fabric responds to being stabbed a million times. If you're using a dull needle, it makes a difference. And honestly, I didn't know that until about 6 years ago. It never occurred to me to change my needle between each project. I just sewed until it seemed like it was a little dull. Okay. that's the top one. Here, I'll show you a little bit. So you can see I've just sewn along the top just to sew this down, and now I'm going to sew along the blue line to create my drawstring channel. So you probably can hear that it doesn't sound as stabby. It's because I'm only going through 2 layers of fabric now instead of 4. So that top piece I'm sewing through the seam fold over and the outside fabrics. And this one I am just doing the 2 layers of fabric. Now I like a really large drawstring channel. That is a personal preference. I know a lot of people like a smaller drawstring channel. You know, every sewer is slightly different, right? Okey pokey. So there we go. Okay, so where did my pins go? Ah, they're there. Okay, so I'm gonna pull all the pins out, and here you can see. So that's along that blue channel. So I have a nice big drawstring channel, which is awesome because I will probably make my own drawstring because I'm like that. Okay, so I have one nice waist yoke, and right now it doesn't have a front or a back. So if you look, this is the side, it rolls over the front, and it fits. Okay, I've got a nice overlap, and there you go. Okay, so what's next, right? Okay, so the next part is I have a middle back. I need to make sure to mark. Do everything on the same side here. So I'm going to line it up, and then I'm just going to pinch it, and then I'm going to use my chalk, and I'm going to mark the center back. Now the sides are already marked because they have a seam, right? So center back, 2 sides, and the front. Now, this is where my really long piece of fabric comes into play. Now what I did earlier is I put a hem in it, so I didn't have to do a hem while we were on live, because a really long hem is really boring to do. So this is the skirt panel. Okay, now in the original pattern, pattern 16, it tells you to measure basically how long from the bottom of the yoke to the end of the petticoat, how long you want it to be. I actually used my previous petticoat as a measurement, which was 31 inches long, and I made this 31.5 so that I could do a seam. So it's going to be probably about a ½ inch shorter than that one, but that's okay because that one's a little long. So I did a hem all along one side. I have left the hem from the sheet already stitched. I didn't take that out, mostly because it's got a finished edge, and why would I waste that? I folded this so that I have my center back marked, and then I have my 2 side seams marked. So I am actually going to do a gather stitch. And I do a gather stitch the old-fashioned way with a piece of needle and thread. So I usually just take thread off my sewing machine and a needle, and I'll move the camera again so you can see. And we sew a gather stitch. And I like to do an old-fashioned gather stitch because even though you should be able to do a gather stitch on the sewing machine, I have found that there is something about how it gathers that doesn't quite look right for me. Anyway. Okay. I'm going to strengthen this with a little bit of beeswax because it is just plain cotton thread. Oh, that's the other thing I wanted to kind of go over. I don't use polyester thread on any of my history bounding or garments that I make for myself. If I make it for somebody else and they give me polyester thread, I'd be happy to. Okay, so I'm going to take the waist side mark and I'm going to gather to the center. And I am just gathering, I mean, it's just a wide gather. Doing any fancy. Is everybody still there? My phone did a weird thing for a minute. Okay. So I have my thread on this side and I have my thread on this side and I'm just gathering one section. So if you did this and you had cut separate panels out, you can totally do that. My panels, if I had cut them out individually, would probably equal about a yard and maybe 3 or 4 inches. I really wanted a puffier petticoat compared to the last one I did, so I'm just using a queen sheet, and it's the entire length of the queen sheet, basically. At least I'm pretty sure it's a queen sheet. Maybe it's a yard, maybe it's a king, but I'm pretty sure it's a queen. Okay. So we're getting to the end here. Now, when I get to the end, so remember I just left the finish edge of the sheet. I didn't actually cut that off or sew it to anything. I am going to secure it to the end with a couple extra stitches. Okay. Now this one's not secured down. That's okay. Now, you have to kind of at this point decide what's going to be the inside of your yoke and what's going to be the outside of your yoke. Now I'm going to treat the blue side as the inside of my yoke because it's the side that has all the markings on it. So I have laid it down. Here, I'm going to show you. There we go. Okay, so I have laid my yoke down. This is the inside. It's the side that has all the blue marks. I'm going to fold it down, okay, so that this edge is my inside edge. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, so I have the inside edge and I'm going to lay my fabric down and figure out how big my gather needs to be. So to do that, best way I know how to explain this is I'm going to pin here and pin the edge over here with a little bit of over. I'm not going to do it. Okay, let me show you. Okay, so I folded that over and now I'm going to lift it and pin this to here. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to pin this whole gathered edge. I'm going to even out the gathers and pin it all down. Does that make sense? Everybody tell me that makes sense, please. Because I don't want to lose anybody. I haven't yet pulled that string completely tight yet. I'm still working on that gather. But I sewed one end to anchor that thread, And then the side that has the black mark is the part that I can pull that thread and tighten that gather as I go. It will give me control over each section of the gather. Okay, good. I'm glad it's making sense. Thank you, Dee Dee. And I'm just gonna go really slowly and make sure that my gathers are tidy and consistent. And what I tell people, if you get lost in your fabric, just lay it back out again. Fabric is, you know, I think it's a sewer's qualm that fabric has its own mind. But if you just take your time and you're patient with it, you're fine. Okay. So I'm going to show it to you again so you can see. This is it laid out. Okay, so this is my thread that I pulled to create the gather, and I have it pinned to the yoke like this. Okay? Now, the temptation would be, and this is a common temptation, the temptation would be to pin it all at the same time and sew it all at the same time. No, let's not do that. So we want to have control over our project, and we want to make sure that the gathers stay exactly where you need them to stay. Okay, so I'm going to sew this section down first before I do anything else. And pro tip, though I can't be considered a pro, is that you want to sew from the back to the front if you can. I have to get my thread. I should probably get another spool out, huh? So I'm not taking this one off all the time. Hopefully y'all are sewing or doing something so you're not just bored watching me do this. Hopefully you're not bored. Okay. Now you're sewing on a curve, so you do have to make sure that your yoke fabric doesn't get bunched up underneath, because let me tell you, I've done that before and it's kind of a pain in the rear to take out. So just take your time, make sure that your ruffles are laying exactly the way you want them to, and that your yoke is flat underneath. Okay. There we go. Ooh, you're working on your Italian dress. Awesome, Sophia. Okay, so take your pins out. And then I usually go back and I try to clip my threads, kind of anything that's weirdly hanging about. And I can cut that gather thread too, because I'm done with that now. Okay, now you're on to, now what I like to do is two sides of the yoke, or the two side pieces of the yoke, and do the back gather last. So I'm going to go back to my yoke and I'm going to lay it where the inside is on top. I'm going to follow my fabric to the side marking, okay? And I'm going to get some more thread. same thing that I did before. I'm not going to put a knot in this, okay? I'm just going to, from my black mark, start it out here, and I'm not going to tie it off over here. You don't want to tie it off because you're going to pull from that end. So I am really enjoying my 1 day off in the last 13 days. I hope that, in theory, my household will be out of exposure a full 14 days come this coming weekend, and then I can go home. Yay! That would be really nice. I would love to be able to go home and see my boyfriend and work in my art room. You know, the things that keep me sane. Okay, so there we go. Is anybody that's on right now doing like work from home type stuff? Okay. Now we're going to double check the side that we're on the correct side of fabric. The last thing you want to do is accidentally sew it the wrong side, because then you have to take it all out again, and that's really irritating. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't like the seam ripper. Oh, Gina, yeah, well, I'm considered essential too, obviously. I'm literally living at my job. Let's see here. Home is your workplace. Well, good job, Michelle. That's awesome. Hopefully I'll get to work from home here in the next couple weeks, as soon as I can go home. Yay! Essential, yes, Adele. I bet you are. You're a nurse, aren't you? We're still doing, what's the word I'm looking for? We're still doing IV nutrients and stuff for some of our patients who are in the high-risk category. So I'm doing IV administration, or administering IVs on patients, and, you know, that kind of stuff. So I still have to be here some. Yeah. You know, it's nice to have a job, but some of me is quite envious of the rest of the costuming community that they get to sit home and just create. This is my first time being able to participate in a keep you guys that are stuck at home busy. Give you some crafting inspiration. Okay, so we are still on the other side panel. Well, I am happy I actually really do love my job. So I'm not going to complain. I know that there's a lot of people that are out of a job, and I really get it, because my boyfriend, his job is not essential, so he is out of work now, and that's going to be tight for all of us, I think. Well, the world does have to go on, right? Okay, so I have got my gathers exactly where I want them. Now I'm going back and I'm pinning. Pinning my gathers down to the right side of the yoke. Same way I did it on the other side. Yeah, I was just thinking to myself the other day that with Luke out and me working, somehow we're going to have to prop each other up financially in this. This is going to be tricky. He's usually the #1 breadwinner. He makes a lot more money than I do. Erg. Okay. Okay. So I have that one pinned. I'm going to go sew that piece together. Remember, if you do each section separately, it creates a lot more control in what it is that you're doing. Now, the other thing that I'm going to, oops, you can't see me. All you can do is hear me. I should probably move that a little bit better. There we go. Now you should be able to see me. Okay, so like I said before, you should sew from the yoke to the waist. That means you're going to be sewing on the opposite side that you were sewing last time. That's okay. You kind of want that. The idea is that you want to push the gathers to the front if you didn't pin enough. Oops, I should probably rethread my needle, huh? There we go. There we go. Now, same as before, I'm just using the presser foot as the edge. So just a 1/4 inch seam. Because the other thing that you don't realize when you're doing it this way is that that other yoke piece from the front is going to fold over and encase the seam. And I lost my thread for some reason. So you don't have to worry about your skirt coming undone from the yoke, because you're actually going to reinforce that seam by another line of stitching. So I'm not really worried about double stitching it or making sure it's a 5/8 inch seam. There we go. And in my sewing room, I have a larger table for fabric to lay out on. So this is what you make do with, right? This is the time of make do. Okay. So we'll take all our pins out. La la la. Oh, there was something wrong with my bobbin case. So, can you see this? I don't know if it's going to let it focus. So, my threads on my sewing machine, this is because my upper sewing machine was not threaded properly. So, the stitches are really loose. So, I'm going to have to go restitch that. Okay, so sometimes that happens. That's probably why it came unthreaded and I had to re-thread it halfway through the sewing. And those of you that were watching saw me do that. Okay, it happens. Sewing machines, you know. If I were doing this by hand, I would be at this for hours. I am not a hand sewer for garment construction most of the time. I'll do finish work, but you're never going to find me hand sewing an entire 14th century kirtle. Just not ever going to happen. Ever. The idea of sitting still and having to hand sew every single seam just sounds like a living nightmare. Why would you do that? I know that there are people out there that love it. I am not one of those people. Okay, so here's my mark for my center back in the yoke. I'm laying it flat and I'm going to draw a line so that I'm line up. So here you can see I've drawn a line. Now I'm going to line up my center back of my skirting. I'm going to line that up and pin it to start with, because I am going to gather this whole huge piece into this side yoke, and then I'm going to pin and do the back yoke. So this is the only time that I'm going to do 2 yokes at the same time. I'm looking for white thread. Ha 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 ha. See, I knew I had more. Okay. Now, this is going to be slightly different, and I kind of learned this by accident at some point. So the trick for this is this back seam. I'm actually going to gather from the back to the side, but I'm going to anchor this end. I'm not going to use a knot, but I am going to sew a knot, basically, if that makes sense. Okay, I'm going to take my pin out because I don't need that now. And I'm going to gather going that way, so toward the side seam. Is anybody watching some interesting shows while they're on vacation? Are there any good ones? I know I keep seeing things referencing to the Tiger King, and I went to Netflix and read the summary, and I was quite disgusted, and I decided I didn't want to watch that. So is there anything else that you're watching? Because I'm not going to watch that one. Picard. Oh, so Luke and I started watching that together before I went into quarantine, and I so much want to watch it, but I promised him that I would not watch it until I got out of quarantine and we could watch it together. So I have only seen the same episodes that he has. So I'm resisting, but I really want to watch it too. Anybody else? Nothing. Well, I guess we all have our garbage watching when we're on that mental place where we need to watch something so we don't overwhelm our brains. Okay, so I've gathered from the center back all the way to the side, and I don't want to take it off the needle yet. I need to pull the gathers. Wish there was a better way I could show you this. I don't have a tripod for my camera. I guess it's on the wish list, right? Yeah, that cleaning and disinfecting piece. I gotcha. So the way my physician that I work for, you know, we've been, you know, disinfecting and doing all the things, right? She found a new study that came out. She's a physician, so she's like tapped into all of these. Here's the new research. And one of the new scary things is that, or I guess not scary, but I guess something that kind of makes sense, is that they're recommending in some places that you spray down your shoes and you take your shoes off at the door so that you're not walking through your house, because they're thinking that this virus can be tramped in that way. So our new policy now is that we all have like slippers. We're all wearing slippers in the work day and our shoes are at the door. So we're spraying them down. So I get it, Gina. There's every time you do anything, you gotta wash your hands and wipe everything down. I'm actually got everything decontaminated from hauling it from the house, the sewing stuff, last week, because I thought I was gonna go live last weekend, and then that didn't happen. Okay, so you just make sure that your gathers are exactly where you want them and pin them in place. Okay, who else is watching? Stargate Atlantis. Oh, I love Stargate Atlantis. Isn't that the one that had Jason Momoa in it? Is that right? Was it Stargate Atlantis, the one that had him in it? I feel like it was. Tell me if I'm way wrong. Because I could be way wrong. Okay, so let me show you a close-up of that. Okay, so here is the center back, and I actually tacked it to this fabric, the yoke fabric, and then all the way over here at the waist, I tacked it to that actual piece. And now I've gathered it all, and now I'm going to gather the other side. It's the only time in the yoke that I do it together, mostly because this yoke piece is one solid piece, where the others are separate pieces. So I hope that makes sense to people. One of the things that is very easy to fight with gathers in any kind of gathering, whatever it is that you're trying to gather, I should say. You want to minimize the fight of the pattern and the fabric and whatever it is that you're putting together. You want to minimize what it is that you're fighting in the project. And having been that person that did it all the hard way first, right? I know we've all been there. If you can find a way to not have to fight and yet cut down time and complexity in your project, that's what you do. It's just like with the pattern piece. Oh, I did have it right. Jason Momoa. Okay, I did have it right. Awesome. I remembered. We have all of the original Stargate on DVD at the house. Luke bought the box set back 2013, I think. And it took us like, I'd say 6 months to watch all 10 seasons. It feels like it anyway. Maybe it didn't take that long, but it feels like it took that long. We're big Stargate fans. I actually, right before quarantine, had started watching a little bit of it again. The original Stargate. Season 1. I think I'm still on season 1. I think I'm on CD 3, though. I think. There's a lot to it. Was anybody but me severely disappointed when Samantha Carter and what's his name? Lead of the team didn't get together. Like, it was like one of those things at the end of the storyline. They like left you hanging with the idea, why didn't they get together? That would have been an awesome pairing. But anyway, I'm not usually really worried about the romantic endeavors of my character, but the characters I watch, but I always feel like that was a undeveloped storyline that could have gone a little bit further. Okay, so I'm going to lay this as flat as I can. So you want to make sure that you have as much evenness as possible. And you're starting to struggle with a lot of fabric here, so you want to make sure that you have the right tension on your gather. Okay. Oh, I lost my gather. I cut it too soon. My bad. Well, that would be because I pulled on it too tight. Okay, so this petticoat, so I've worn my other petticoat based on this pattern underneath my English Tudor. It is not Tudor appropriate, like it's not technically a Tudor petticoat because they wore kirtles. They didn't really wear petticoats. So the answer to that question is this is a modern petticoat pattern, and you could probably get away with this petticoat pattern underneath pretty much anything that needs a petticoat, honestly. Now, it's not a historically accurate petticoat pattern because this is a modern petticoat pattern that I adjusted to make fit a little bit more along the lines of the history-bounding Victorian type style skirting that I've been wearing lately. And I wear a lot of that to work. So like this is a modern blouse, and I adjusted a scarf to a cravat type style because I really enjoy that look. Petticoats for Venetian would probably look a little bit more like a farthingale. Hold that thought. Okay, so do you have this book, Dee Dee? Is this like kind of the era that you're going for? No, you don't have that book, or you're not going for that era. Yes, that's the era. Okay, so these outfits seem, I mean, I only have brief glimpses of the garment that you posted. Let me see here if I can find one that's similar. There's a lot of dresses in here. Give me a second. I know what I'm looking for. Give me a second. So this lady right here Is that kind of like similar to the top of yours, or is yours more of a... Or is yours more like this one? First or second video, or image? Okay, I'm gonna sew now. Yay! Let's see if I can switch it. I don't know if it's gonna stay. Neither. Okay. Well, we can talk about it later. You're right. So there's a lot of variations on petticoats and when they came into be used and kind of how we think of petticoats. And for the garments that I make for my history bounding stuff, I do a lot of separate skirts from tops. So I need petticoats for the skirting to make them fluff out enough, if that makes sense. And yes, I am sewing with pins in my outfit. Don't kill me. Okay, you can see I'm kind of adjusting the gathers as I go. Okay, and this is my center back. And now we're going on to the next side. Now I can feel the yoke on the back side, so I'm being careful that it's not puckering underneath my fingers. Okay, there we go. Okay, so that probably takes the most time is getting the skirting attached to the yoke, so it should go pretty fast now. Okay, picture us can send you, yes, send me a picture and maybe we can do a FaceTime where we talk about it, Dee Dee, the dress. Okay, what else? When I saw it, I thought it was like a Florentine open front, but not wide open. Okay, so petticoat, where are we? So if we look at it like this, this is what we have. We have all of the skirting sewn onto the yoke. Isn't it pretty? I love this part. And then this is the outside fabric yoke. And you can see the seam, okay? Now because I sewed, so it's one long rectangle piece of fabric, right? I just tore it along the center of a sheet. So I don't have to worry about hemming this thing because it's already hemmed. I don't have to worry about finishing the inside seam because it's already done. I don't have to worry about the yoke seam because it's already done. We are literally more than halfway there, right? This is like amazing. I love this. Okay, so I'm gonna move some things out of the way. Now, this is the part where you iron. You have to iron it going that way. Okay, so we're going to use the same trick we used before because I don't have a tailor's ham. So I'm going to show it to you here this way. Here. So I don't have a tailor's ham, so step one of ironing it is going to be ironing it where I can see the seam, and I want to iron it where the seam is up. Okay, so I'm going to iron all the way around on that part first. Please tell me if any of my instructions don't make any lick of sense, because I know that it makes sense in my head, and I don't always know that I'm making that clear. I also have to wait for my iron to heat up a little bit. Kind of turned off. Because I don't have a tailor's hand, that's why I'm ironing it this way. Because I want to flatten that seam up towards the inside of that yoke. Most people at this juncture would probably use a tailor's ham. I don't have one. So I am telling the seam to lay flat, going that way, up into the yoke. Okay. There we go. Okay. Now that I've done that, we're back to looking at it from the outside. So I have the outside yoke facing me. And I want to make sure, I'm going to show you again so you can see what I see. Okay, so I want to make sure that my seams line up, and I'm going to fold this under, okay, all along this seam, and then I'm going to pin it. And I'm going to pin it flat, and then I'm going to iron it so it's ironed and pinned before I go to sew it. There we go. And you do want to make sure it's as flat as possible. I have all these threads that are driving me crazy. There we go. Okay. Some of my pins I've had so long, they don't want to stab anymore. I really need to get more pins. It's kind of it's a struggle. I bought some last year, some new pins off Amazon, and I thought, oh yay, new pins, right? No. Not only no, but hell no. They were more dull than the ones that I was trying to replace. Talk about frustrating and maddening. And they were even Dritz brand. And Dritz brand were the ones that I got originally. So I'm still using the dull ones. Like, what gives, people? What? Why can't you get sharp, pointy things anymore? Maybe it's just my luck. Has anybody else had any problems with getting sharp pins? Maddening. Come on. There we go. Okay. So iron it. And whatever you do, don't pin it to your board like I just did. There you go. Okay. It feels good when you get to the place where you know you're about halfway done. I'm going to move this up a little bit. I need to get a tripod so that when I do this again, I can move the tripod and you can see what I'm actually doing. I apologize about that, guys. Does anybody have any general other kind of sewing questions, or maybe a request for something else for me to do live? I did an embroidery live about a month ago. I think it was in February. I don't know if anybody saw that after the fact. Does anybody have any, I think, so Dee Dee and Kit and Adele and Gina, y'all are all in the SCA. Corset, okay. Dee Dee, you picked the one topic I have. It's the personal nightmare of my own, actually. I have made 2 part of bodies. And one was a rope one, and one was a zip ties, basically as close as I could get to boning without doing boning. And I would say that if I never make another one, I'll be good. Honestly, there are so many really good corset makers out there that if you want a corset and you want to learn how to make a corset, there are hundreds of corset making videos out there. That is not my specialty. And I am going to be the first one to fall upon that altar of ineptitude. It's not my thing. But if you want to know how to make a boned kirtle, that I can show you how to do. Boning a bodice is something different than making a corset. Similar, but not the same. Is Gina still on here? She's made a corset. I think she has anyway. Haven't you, Gina? Are you still on? A boned kirtle would be honest. There you go. See, Gina? Dee Dee, Gina knows how to make one. Maybe that's what Gina should do. Gina should do a live. Oh, you've made 12. Holy moly. Well, a boned kirtle I can help you with. We could totally make a boned kirtle for the next one. You can do, so I like the Tudor type boned, or I've made both boned and just stiffened reinforced kirtle. Hey Michelle, good job. Making corsets is its own thing. I mean, hands off to any of y'all who do it. That's not my thing. You know, I've said it before, one of my favorite things is to make clothes that I can embroider or make garments that I can embellish. It's probably why I make stuff, is just so I can bling them up. Okay, one more panel to go and then I'll give you a picture of what I'm doing here. Yeah, corsets are its own thing. There are hundreds of videos out there on how to make them. There aren't as many on how to make a boned kirtle or a reinforced kirtle. I think there's a couple. And everybody's kind of got their own take on it. I certainly have my own take on it. Ooh, flying needles. So there's a whole thing on making reinforced kirtles that don't actually have boning, that they're just using stiffened fabric and glue and stuff. Rabbit glue, I believe, is one theory on how to make them. All the kirtles that I have made, I've made. So Dee Dee, I don't know if you remember, but the black linen kind of Venetian-ish type one that I made first, it's got boning in it. And also reinforced with canvas. Now the ones that I make for Tudor, I've made one with boning, and I actually went back and took the boning out and reinforced the front with just a stiffer fabric. It's a hell of a lot more comfortable. And the Tudor gowns have very little boning in them. So they're just, the kirtle itself is what creates that shape for that Tudor outfit. And so the black Tudor and my red Tudor, those are all, the kirtle itself creates that shape. Now the early Venetian one, the boning is actually in the bodice, and it's actually really comfortable. It's similar to the feel of a corset. It definitely gives you a shape and holds you together and keeps your girls up and all those other wonderful things. The downside is that I made the bodice too long, so it digs into my hips. I have a really, really high waist. So it was a learning experience. It's actually on my list of UFOs to take apart and rebuild the bodice and attach the skirt again. Okay, I'm gonna show you what I've done. So I have folded over and pinned the outside yoke to the fabric, okay? And I've done that all the way down. And now I'm going to sew that. Yay. Wonder if I can get the video to do it without losing my phone again. Do. Okay, we'll see. Okie dokie. Oh, I've got a stray piece of thread here. There we go. Now I am going to take the pins out this time. So it's making a loud clunking sound because I'm going through a lot of fabric. It sounds like it's breaking. It's not, I promise. Okay, the phone's gonna fall, so I'm gonna move it a little bit here. It keeps wanting to follow me. I'm just gonna put you back on the counter. Sorry, guys. There we go. Hopefully you're learning something. So it sounds really bad because I'm sewing through the inside yoke, the outside yoke, and the gathered fabric. So it's and the yoke is folded in half to encase this seam. So it just sounds worse than it is. Oh, another thing that I could totally share with you. I have this little magnet on top of my sewing machine so that as I pull pins, I don't have to worry about having a pin cushion or pin case right close. I don't even remember who showed me or gave me the idea, but whoever she is, she was a sewer of some kind that I knew years ago. I don't remember who it was. But it's an amazing idea, and I love it, and I use it. And every sewing machine I've had for at least the last 15, 20 years has had that on it, because I love how it works. Okay, so we have Cat sends it kit buffering is keeping her from watching. Oh, well, hopefully this will let me load it, download it, and edit it and make it a little bit more concise for an instructional video on YouTube, right? I'm hoping. Okay, so one side, fully encased on the other side. Look how beautiful that is. It's a lovely petticoat. Okay, so now we just have the front to worry about and the drawstring. So on my original one, it didn't fit as much up top because I used a smaller yoke in the front. So I ended up having to encase this front piece with a piece of silk it was just a nightmare. So I learned a little bit from that. And what I want to do to close this time is I still am gonna have the drawstring. And I want to fold over to create that enclosed spot. But I have to be careful of this drawstring area here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to iron it first. And I'm going to show you once I iron it here. La la la. It's not the most professional way of doing this, but it is going to save me on fabric and on time. And there's a little bit of hand stitching involved, but that's okay. I won't make you watch that part. I'll just explain it to you when I get there. Because watching me hand sew is probably the most tedious thing ever. Just because. I really need to get new pins. If anybody knows of a good online place I can get pins that aren't dull, that would be amazing. Because of course I can't go to the store, right? Okay, that's that side. Let's do this side. I'm gonna do both sides and then I'm gonna show you what it looks like. It is so frustrating to have dull needles. Pins, ouch, because they're just sharp enough to owie when they stab you and then not sharp enough to go through the fabric. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I did. So before I sew the skirt to it, I want to, so I folded in this and folded in this, and I'm going to sew along this edge to encase it. The drawstring casing, I'm actually going to hand sew that in before I throw the drawstring in at the very end. So that will be hand stitched, but I'm going to sew this on both sides and then I'm going to sew the front together and I'll be back with you here. Sharpen with an ultra fine file. Okay, each individual one. Please tell me there's a better idea. Please? That sounds very tedious. I mean, it's a good idea, but it's also tedious. Okay. One side, here's the other side. So, I use a nail file. I'm sitting here watching TV and doodling and hand sewing. That's, I guess, not a bad idea. Okay, so my two right sides together. I've sewed down this seam to encase this. And now I want to make sure I leave that open so that I can get this big yoke over my hips. But I want to sew down this closed seam that's the edge of the sheet. Okay, so this is the edge of the sheet. Okay, so I am going to right sides together. So here's my hem and here's my hem. I'm gonna right sides together from the bottom, just pin it. So I don't have to worry about felling the seam because that's the edge of the sheet. So I didn't unpick that, I didn't take it apart. I am using what was already done for me, so I don't have to create extra work for myself. So I'm just pinning up the side. Okay. And when I get up to this part up here, I'm actually gonna go over that huge knot, right over the top of where that gather is. I'm gonna end it right here. Mostly to keep the consistency. Now it's gonna be really tricky to sew over that, so always go slow when you're going over lots of fabric. And I got something sewed or lined up wrong because my seam is coming apart in the back. So always check your bobbin tension, and always check, you know, there could be anything at all wrong with how it's sewing together, so you just check it. Especially if you're doing a long seam like I'm doing, I want to check it before I get it all done. Always check your bobbin just in case, because it could be something that's just an adjustment up from the bobbin tension. Did I mention that I don't like to hand sew long sleeves? See how easy that's coming apart? It's because the bobbin tension upper thread wasn't right. So you rip it out and you start over. Try that again. Yep, much better. We're getting to the point where it's a thicker fabric. So I go really slow. Oh, I got it. Okay. Okay, so here we go. We have a petticoat. The only thing that's not done is the drawstring. One petticoat, and I will hand sew the drawstring stuff at the top. And that's gonna fit awesome. And there's enough room to do the drawstring over the top so it's fits, but it's loose and it's not too snug. Isn't that awesome? One petticoat down. I just have a little hand stitching to do around the seam, the drawstring holes, and then put the drawstring in. Yay! Okay, does anybody have any questions about a petticoat? That was pretty simple. So those of you that joined a little bit later, this is the pattern, generally speaking, that I used. And I only used number 15 and 16 pattern pieces, number 15 and 16 pattern pieces. And actually, I didn't even really use that much. I just used the 15 for the yoke, and then the 16 pattern piece, which is the long rectangle, I just used a sheet and I tore it however long I wanted to be. Any questions? That's it. That's a petticoat. Like, that's pretty much the sum of it. I'm not going to videotape my hand sewing the drawstring holes, but I am welcome to questions. Anybody? I don't know if it's a lag or if it's just that y'all don't have any questions. You are very welcome, Michelle. Absolutely. This is mostly a history bounding thing. I mean, it's not really SCA specific. I can do an SCA specific kirtle making if you want in the future. I can totally, in theory, when I get back to my house in my own studio, I can put that together with a little bit more ease. But until then, yes, it was great to hang out with everybody. Okay, guys. Well, I'm gonna sign off, and again, I'll always subscribe to my channel if you can. I know we're not on YouTube right now, and I wanted to make that work, but it just didn't today. So maybe I will have the YouTube thing working out next time, and I hope you all have a beautiful day and enjoy some sewing. Bye-bye.